And we are live here in the Storycraft Cafe. I am your host, Hank Garner. Today, super excited to have Jim Butcher joining us on the show. Jim, if you are familiar with fantasy literature at all, then you know Jim. He needs no introduction, but he is the author of 17 Dresden Files novels at this point,
Yep.
6 books in the Codex Alera, and now the second book in the Cinder Spires series, the much anticipated and awaited The Olympian Affair. It comes out this fall. I have had a chance to read it. It is amazing. Jim, we talked a few years ago when the first Cinder Spires book came out, The Aeronauts Windlass. And, a lot of people have been anxious for this second book. How has the writing been going, and what do you hope to bring to the reading audience with the second book in the Cinder Spires?
Oh, I've been on a tear lately. I got to the point where I was thinking about abandoning the series because I wasn't sure there was a lot of interest in it, and I was sort of fumbling around with my career, trying to decide where to focus my energy next. And I wound up going to Dragon Con last year, and I had a dozen different readers come up separately and say, "When's the next book in the Cinder Spires going to come out? I really want to know what happens to these people." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I can't let them down." So I came back from that and started hammering on it every night, and really, kind of got back into my groove and got that done. And I got that hammered out, and then did a novella that's going to come out a month ahead of time. So some additional story for people who might not have seen enough of one of the characters, and they were asking for more. And then I got straight to work on the next Dresden. That's about a quarter done, and I anticipate having that done before Christmas.
Well, Dragon Con usually is late August, early September.
Yep.
So if you started getting, requests for the second Cinder Spires last year, Dragon Con, that's just about a year ago. Did the whole book come about in this past year? Did you have part of it already written?
I think I had about 12 chapters already done. And sort of I got to the beginning, and then you get to that middle part where you're not quite sure what comes next, and it gets sticky, and it gets hard to write the book when you get to the middle. And I got the beginning was easy, and I got that out of the way, and I got to the middle and just sort of bogged down. But at that point, it's like, well, I got to get to work. There's too many people who are looking forward to reading this. So.
That's awesome. Before we get into, some really deep conversation, I do have a question for you. Dresden has a dog, Mouse, with superior intellect and dexterity. The Cinder Spires has talking cats.
They do.
Which is better? Dogs, cats? I feel like that you used to have a different opinion about this, but in the last, decade or less, maybe your opinion has changed.
Oh, I started living with more cats, and my ex had 3 Maine Coons, and so I got to live with them, and they're wonderful cats. They're very social. They always want to be hanging out wherever you are, and they're super snuggly. And then we adopted a cat who just sort of wandered in off the street. I think maybe the cat adopted us, but he just got to a point where I would lay down on the couch, and he would just lay down on my chest and stick his head under my chin, and it's like, okay, buddy, I guess I'm officially your hero now. So he's still with me. That's Fenris. And then he weighs about 5.5 pounds. I've got a 95-pound pit bull named Brutus, and Fen just bosses Brew around as long as all day long. He'll just come over, and Brew will be laying on his dog bed, and Fen will come over and kick him off the bed, and then curl up and go to sleep in the middle. So I've got this huge bed made for a 100-pound pit bull, and just a little 5-pound cat curled up in a little, just a little ball in the center of it. It's kind of hilarious. But I think it depends on the situation. What situation are you in? The dog is a lot better at going outside and going hiking with you and stuff like that. I mean, there's some cats that are good at it. Don't get me wrong, but Fenris is not one of those cats. When I take Fenris outside, he's walking and I'm following him around places. That's. But Brew's much better for going outside. If you want to go and play, I think Brew is superior at playing. But Fenris is just so much more convenient to snuggle. And often I have them both like on my, like physically touching me at the same time. You know, I'll have Fenris lap and Brew with his chin on my knee, and both of them asleep, and they both snore. Although, you know, Brutus is way better at snoring. I got to give him that.
Yeah. You have created some of the most interesting, dynamic characters in all of fiction. Have you ever had a character that you created or came to you, you know, however characters exist, that you thought would be an epic character no matter what the plot is? Or have you had an idea for a plot that would be epic and amazing no matter what characters you cast in that plot?
I don't think there's such a thing as a plot that is epic with lame characters. I mean, that just doesn't fly.
Yeah.
That said, you don't have to be Superman to be epic, you know.
Yeah.
But characters is one of the things that I think gets dropped way too often in service to plot. I mean, we've all seen shows or movies or read stories where it's like, well, I'm not quite sure why this is happening, and then you kind of think about it and you go, well, it's happening because the plot needs it to happen. And when you're doing your character properly, you never run into that problem because your character is driving the story, and you can follow them. You know, they tend to act. I don't want to say the characters all act rationally, because they don't always act rationally, but they act understandably. They act human, unless you're writing particularly inhuman ones, I suppose. But yeah, I don't think I mean, I've got a lot of stories that I want to tell. At my current rate of production, I'll have to live to be 128 to tell the ones that I've got in mind now.
Right.
You know, much less the ones that are coming, you know, that will come to me in the future. But the ones I came up with when the core stories I came up with when I was younger, I really like. I think there's a lot of dynamism to them. You know, I had a lot more energy then. And I think the stories are planned out pretty well, and I've done really well with them. So I don't want to mess with success. But you know, I've got several other stories I want to write. I've got my science fiction series, which is basically X-Men meets Men in Black on the moon, about 200 years in the future, and which I really want to get done. That's called the U.S. Marshals. I've got an epic fantasy series that I want to write that is, you know, kind of fantasy Incredibles. That I want to do, and we'll just have to see, you know, how things turn out. But I've got all kinds of ideas and stuff that I want to do, but you know, I didn't really. This whole Dresden thing got completely out of hand.
Well, speaking of that epic fantasy series, you've threatened for years that you're going to write this epic fantasy series.
Yeah, when I'm a grown up. Yeah.
And that every fantasy writer, you know, secretly wants to write an epic fantasy series. What is the allure of the epic fantasy series? And you know, what is the draw of writing that kind of series, and what kind of weight does that sort of series carry over, you know, what we consider market fiction? And is there something more weighty to epic fantasy?
Okay, let me address the first part of the question first.
Okay.
What is the draw to it for me as a writer? I want to address that first. And that just is, you know, I mean, I started my life with Grandpa Tolkien. You know, you remember the box set that you got at the book fair with the red, yellow, green, blue.
I had that same set.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
When it was just about the only fantasy out there was that and Elfstones, and a little bit later the Dragon books that Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman did.
Right. The Dragonlance.
Dragonlance. Yes. Yeah. And other than that, you know, there was that, and Gary Gygax was writing some books and stuff like that. But you know, Tolkien was the master. He was the acknowledged. Right. This is the model, and you know, I always wanted that. I wanted Tolkien, but with more testosterone. You know, that was sort of what I sort of wanted more of it in. I wanted more Aragorn out of Tolkien. You know, I wanted more. You know, I wanted to see more of the dramatic, cool confrontation. I wanted to see Gandalf be not so subtle. and which is partly where the Dresden Files came from. But you sort of looked at that and you read these books, and especially if you read them young, and I read them first when I was 8, and then I read them again when I was 10, and it was a completely different story, and again when I was 15, it was a completely different story, and again when I was 20, 25, 40. I mean, you see the different things that are in it as you get older and as you gain more perspective. And I wanted to write something that was like that, something that could be a series that could be a companion for people for a long time. And that segues pretty neatly into the commercial reason of why you write epic fantasy. Fantasy books have legs. I mean, you can write a fantasy story, and because it's not connected to our world, because it is not focused upon certain events or certain philosophies or certain politics. You can write those books and about just classic principles and things that stand over time, and as a result, those books stay in print forever.
Yeah.
And that's one of the. I mean, it's one of the great things about them. I wrote the Alera series, which was a fantasy series that I wrote. In the early 2000s. They started coming out not too long after Dresden, and those things are still. I mean, they're still selling. They're still making me money, and I feel good about that. Fantasy is a very good genre to be in if you want to have books in print for a long time.
Yeah, a lot of mystery and thrillers that are set in the in the current time with current politics and all of the window dressing,
especially
those things age.
Yeah, especially current tech, because tech
Yes.
changes so fast.
Oh yeah, and that's probably why you're seeing more and more mystery thrillers that are set back in the 80s and 70s even, because once you have a supercomputer in your pocket, there's a whole lot of plots that just kind of fall apart.
Google does so much to ruin fantasy.
Yeah.
Or to ruin mystery, that is.
And the ability to send a text, hey,
Yeah.
get me out of this locked room,
Yeah, I mean, I don't. I still remember the skits online where or I think it was one of the animated movies where the Riddler was up to something, and Waller was on the other end of the line, and the Riddler asks her a riddle, and she answers him, and he's like, have you already heard that one? And she says, no, I have Google, like everyone else. And it's like, yeah, that does kind of ruin the Riddler in a lot of ways. He's really going to have to adapt, for the new world.
Oh, that's hilarious. Speaking of Codex Alera, you started. Did you start writing that after Dresden? They were pretty close, weren't they?
I wrote the first 2 Dresden books, and before they were sold, I started the first Alera book.
Okay, gotcha.
I wrote that book, the first book in that series, and that was already done by the time I started on the 3rd Dresden, and there were just my first contract. I was lucky; I got a 3-book contract with my first one, and so I sold those first 3 Dresden books, and I had gotten number 4 done, and proved that I could write on a schedule. And then they were like, "Well, let's see your fantasy," and I started working on that, and I think I finally got that one sold about the time the 7th Dresden book came out.
How did having 2 series to work on help you creatively, to kind of keep from going crazy? Because you went very deep very quickly on Dresden. I mean, we're up to book 17 now.
Yeah.
As a creative person, that has to be draining at some point to live in this world constantly with these characters. You need a break. You need other ways to stretch your creative muscles.
Especially from Dresden. He's sort of having that really high energy roommate, and
yeah.
And when you're doing stuff and you're doing active stuff, it's great. But when he's just sort of bouncing around the inside of my head, while I'm like, listen, don't stop giving me new ideas. I'm trying to get this one finished. That gets wearisome after a while. So being able to cut over to those fantasy books, which were written first person, they were written third person, and that's a very different form of storytelling. When you're writing everything from an I me perspective, how you're going to do 90% of the job, because it's all got to be from this character's perspective and the way they experience it. And it's also very good for making sure your story follows logically from one chapter to the next. But when you switch over to the third person perspective, you have so many more choices. And I like to say so much more rope with which you can hang yourself. And it's a harder story to write. I think ultimately there's more possible from the third person perspective. It's not my first area of skill, but I like to work on it because I think you should work your weaker areas to make it stronger. But by the time I'm done with the Dresden book, I'm like, oh, get me out of this guy's perspective. Let me see a different world. And I go to the third person perspective, and I got all these different characters to juggle in Codex Alera, or not Codex Alera, in Codex Alera, but also now in the Cinder Spires books.
Right.
By the time I get done, with this act, then I'm like, oh my gosh, get me away from all these people with all their different concerns and perspectives, and let me just get back in the saddle with Dresden. Good to see you, buddy. Like that,
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where, the grass is always greener, and you kind of enjoy switching from one project to the other, and hopefully I can get my writing down disciplined enough that I can start getting a couple of books done a year, and then at least part of another project, so that I'll have some more stuff coming, in future years. I've been on, I won't say a hiatus, but I haven't been nearly as productive the past several years, and I'm turning that around now. So we'll see how that goes.
Well, speaking of writing in the first person perspective, and Dresden specifically, they always say that as a writer, you write yourself into your books. Rarely do readers pick up all the places where you come through the characters. What people think, oh, this is Jim writing himself into it rarely is what people think. It's usually the other places where pieces of you come out. Dresden is a very unique character, and let me just say it like that. And he has some very specific views on the world and the people around him. When writing a character in first person like that for so long, is it difficult to remove yourself from Dresden and to allow him to be the creature of his place and time that's not Jim Butcher? Like, do you ever find yourself bleeding over into Dresden or him into you, and you have to step back and think, I am not the characters that I create?
I think there's more of an issue. In a lot of ways, Dresden is who I would like to be if I had the kind of power that he has access to.
Sure.
I'm not sure. I'm not at all confident that I would be that person. But in a lot of ways, he's who I'd like to be. And so, if anything, I think Dresden bleeds a little bit more into my life than the other way around. That said, though, I mean, Dresden is one of the characters I role play. I do a lot of live action role play. I do a lot of tabletop gaming. Where I play different characters, and I try and play people who are very different than me. Dresden is, he's kind of a lot of my video gamer side, what he does in real life, and other than that, I don't know. I keep getting told, Dresden's you, and I kind of stop and think about that and go, well, I suppose he is. I mean, so's everybody else. So if Dresden's me, then that also means that Mab is me and Marcone is me, and so on. But
right.
I guess we all contain multitudes.
Yeah. You told me one time that Codex Alera was a nod to Hornblower, if I remember right.
No, that's the new one. The new one is a Hornblower.
That was what were some of the themes of Hornblower that you wanted to explore in this book, and why was it important to you to kind of go down this road?
Well, Codex Alera, the Hornblower aspect of that one was the idea of the progression of the main character, the central character.
Yeah,
the character starts off, in Shepherd Boy's Fury, and then he moves on up to he becomes an academ at the academy. And as he progresses through life, that's how each book is titled, and that was something that Hornblower did as well. And that story it's a coming of age story. It's how you turn into an adult.
Yeah.
And how he becomes a responsible and active member of his society. As far as Codex Alera goes, or excuse me, as far as the Cinder Spires goes, I'm taking aspects of Hornblower where the character. There are a lot of characters who are dealing with aspects of honor and how do you behave responsibly and honorably when you're put into these situations where you have conflicts of interest and where perhaps your basic humanity has to be compared against your loyalty to your home, or where you're going to have to decide what kind of sacrifice has to be made and how much are you willing to give up. Um, in this particular one, there's also some duels, which I love. I love writing duels because there are so many. Well, one, because I grew up on Star Wars, and the duels were the center of those stories.
Oh yeah.
And I always felt that the original Star Wars trilogy, that the duels were really just an excuse to have a confrontation of philosophies. I mean, there was a lot of that going on during the duels in Star Wars. There was a lot of talking happening, and I enjoy writing it for that same reason, is to kind of show these differing viewpoints on life coming into direct confrontation with each other, and how does that turn out? What does that mean? So there's a lot of that built into there's a lot of that Hornblower stuff built into the Cinder Spires, just because one of the central characters is literally a ship captain who has to decide all these things on his own, kind of away from his center of civilization, and how does he make his calls? How does he make his decisions? Which is more important to him, his personal honor or his loyalty to his essentially feudal lord. And I have a great deal of fun, playing with that and coming up with situations in the middle of that. And I love having the cats around, because the cats are always there to point out the essential human absurdities in any given situation. And that's a lot of fun as well.
Yeah. The cats are really interesting, especially from the perspective of reading a lot of Dresden Files, where different subgenre of fantasy, where Dresden is very much rooted and grounded in the real world, and then the fantastical characters that kind of fill out the world. Whereas this world of the Cinder Spires, kind of all bets are off. Anything can happen, because we're not kind of rooting and grounding in the real world like we do in urban fantasy. As a writer, does that what does that do for the way you see the world and how the story of that world unfolds, knowing that anything is possible? You've kind of removed the rules, as it were.
Well, I don't think I've removed the rules as much as I've removed all the familiar touchstones that we're all used to.
Okay.
We just make regular associations. When I'm writing the Dresden Files, I can say they were in a Walmart, and everybody goes, yeah, I've been in one of those. I know what that looks like. Saves me so much work.
Right.
You are in, when you are in this, completely alien society on this planet where they have to exist under much different circumstances than we do in our world. You've got to do all the work. You got to do all the lifting. You got to make sure you got all the sets, lined up yourself. You got to make sure you get the right mood for everything that's happening. You can't lean on anything that is a common experience in terms of environment for the reader to go with. You have to give the reader everything that they need to be able to have that emotional experience of what the characters are going through in that moment and in that place. You have to provide them with just enough of their imaginations to grab onto and go, oh my gosh, that would be horrifying, or that's hilarious. You're doing well when you do world building and you can make a joke that is very specific to your world, and have people enjoy it. Which is a joke that just wouldn't work anywhere else.
We've got a couple of comments that have come in. Hey Jim, looking forward to meeting you at Fantasy Festival in Denmark in September. I hope to talk to you a few minutes about Pathfinder after your Q&A. What's your favorite role-playing game, and why is it Pathfinder?
I admire Pathfinder because I think Paizo has been just so astute in their business process. It's like when fourth edition came out and D&D radically changed from what it had been before to kind of a more World of Warcrafty kind of game. Paizo went, you know what? Let's have some more. Let's have some more tradition. We'll go with D&D for the people who still want that. And they leaned heavy into that, and that's when they really exploded, as a game system. Um, I enjoy the hell out of Pathfinder. I've just started a game where I'm doing second edition Pathfinder with a different character action economy and so on. It's a very different place to run tactical combat, which that's a lot. That's half the game is tactical combat, and the other half is the role playing stuff that happens between them. Um, I've been having a great time doing that. I really do enjoy the hell out of Pathfinder. I've looked at I've done a little bit of D&D fifth edition, but it hasn't been as favorite. I mean, I'll always go back to D&D because it's the original game system I grew up under. But I started with first edition D&D. In fact, I started with expert D&D, before advanced D&D, and so it's going to have my heart always to some degree, but I'm really enjoying running Pathfinder. My favorite system to run though is Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay because it's just so dark, and you can run the grimdark stuff. And when you're doing the grimdark stuff, and then you throw the humor in to lighten things up, I think everybody has a much better time. And I will always have fond memories of my college years where I ran Warhammer relentlessly.
Nice, nice. The life of a novelist can be very uh, lonely, if you will, because for the most part, you're sitting in a room alone telling stories, and later in the process, when editors and proofreaders and the rest of publishing comes in, it becomes more of a cooperative thing. But for the vast majority of the process, it's just you and a keyboard. Um, Role playing games are really cooperative storytelling when it comes down to it. Does having that outlet feed you creatively, and does that give you an opportunity to not just be the crazy guy in the room with his keyboard?
Yeah, well, when I'm writing, I'm essentially playing D&D with myself, and I'm the only one there, and I have to be the GM and all the characters. And that's not nearly as much fun as when I'm at a table with people and the banter is going back and forth and we're having a good time with it. Um, I play a lot with my sons, and my sons have very little respect for me when it comes to the gaming table. They enjoy having a very merrily adversarial game, and there's lots of quips and insults flowing, and we have a great time together. Um, uh, uh, that said, yeah, the writing part can be real lonely. It's great to it's great for my ability as a writer and for my own personal imagination to be working with other people, because unlike the characters that I write, they never do what I the players, they just never do what I want them to do. And so I find myself, they go off in a totally different direction than where they're supposed to go, and I find myself frantically building this world 6 inches in front of their toes as they charge ahead full speed. And that I think that's a very good exercise to build up your imagination and to build up and to figure out how to build up a coherent world. And so I practice that over and over. I'm always running different campaigns in different planetary settings and so on. So one campaign will be it will be based around a race through essentially Africa, only it's D&D Africa, and there'll be some going back and forth through all these environments, racing against these other teams and having the problems that come up when you encounter them. The next campaign will be, I'll run Keep on the Borderlands, except I'll run it during a zombie apocalypse, and the Keep is the last human holdout place, and so the going off to the Caves of Chaos turns into a diplomatic mission to try and make contact with the Greenskins to unite against the undead, and that changes everything completely. And it is so much fun for me to create these different worlds with these different considerations, and then then to toss the people I love into them and see what happens.
Man. Um, Jim, over the last decade, I've done 1,500 or so author interviews, and there are two different types of people that I've discovered. One, the type of writer who writes novels. If they don't succeed and find publishing, they scrap that novel, go to the next one, and they kind of continue that process until either they become better writers or the market is more prepared for this book, whatever the case is. And then I've met a few who write a novel, it's not good enough, so they go back and they revise that novel. And until it is good enough or until the market catches up to them, whatever the case is. But
Right.
they focus on this one story. I believe you've told me in the past that you wrote a few trunk novels that didn't see publication.
Yeah.
Do you ever consider going back to them? Do you ever have the idea, oh, now I know why that story didn't work? Or is it kind of like the story junkyard where you go out and rob a story for parts
Oh yeah, I
from
scrap
time to
them for
time?
parts. I absolutely scrap them for parts. Yeah.
Yeah,
I got, I think 4 different story worlds, 7 different novels that I wrote that just weren't. They just weren't doable. Were awful. I was learning. That's how it happens. You start off, in order to be good at something. First, you have to suck at something, and then
yeah,
work until you're better at it, and then eventually you can be pretty good. And I feel like I've gotten to the point where I'm pretty good now, but I think I can do better. And so I continue to try and work on my skills and to work on my craft to be able to create better and better stories. Um, those early books, oh my gosh, yeah, they were a mess, and they were a mess because I didn't know. There was so much I didn't know about the writing process that I couldn't know until I had written a whole book, and then
yeah,
understood. Oh, wait a minute, I forgot to build a foundation under this one, or yeah, I made this wall really great, but I forgot to put in a door, and now there's no place for this door to go, and that sort of thing. Um, where I didn't leave things open enough, so there wasn't enough flexibility for me to tell different kind of stories or to really be able to play in that world. And as you learn more, I think I could go back to some of them, and there's some of the ones that are in the background that I think could be, I'm going to be able to take that world and use it in the future, but I'm going to have to, start the story in a completely different place with completely different characters and completely different villains, especially villains. You learn more and more about those as you keep writing, and they're so critical. And eventually, I'll be able to lift a bunch of the characters and a bunch of the situations from that past and be able to put it back together again. But goodness, it's like I had this company of mercenaries that I wrote in an early book that there was like 15 of them, and I was trying to I was trying to write all of these different characters, and how they would interact
right.
and so on. And it finally got to a point where it's just like, you know what, you just can't handle that many. You're just not that good yet. You can't be that concise and that clear yet. And so we'll whittle these 15 mercenaries down to one guy. Okay, that works a lot better. Then you move on from there.
Yeah. You've told the story before about your writing teacher and how that she tried to get through to you, and you eventually decided to do it her way out of spite,
Yeah.
and that's what eventually became the Dresden Files.
Yeah.
Was looking back now, was there any one piece of advice that wasn't getting through your head, that when you did it her way, this was the thing that unlocked? Or was it just scrapping everything you thought you knew, following the process? What was it, do you think, that you did differently that unlocked the thing that had been blocking you?
For me, I was pretty good at writing. I was pretty good at writing scenes, and a scene is any portion of your story where your character is actively pursuing a goal. And sometimes that goal is as simple as survive, and sometimes it's get information, or so on and so forth. But when your character is after that goal, I could write that. And then there's some kind of adversary that gets in the way, so there's conflict. And I was pretty good at writing those scenes. What I wasn't good at writing, and what I learned that is really is most of writing, is you're right. It is writing the character's emotional reactions after you get out of those high tension situations. Those were called sequels, not sequels as in follow-ups, but sequels as in the next thing in the sequence. And the next thing in the sequence, after you have these high stakes scenes where there's all this tension and all this action, is showing how your character reacts to those. And when I started really studying the structure of sequels and understanding, okay, wait, there's a psychological process that everybody goes through after situations like that. First your first reaction is always this emotional reaction. How do you handle that? And then you can sort of bring reason in after you get your emotions under control, and then you can kind of review what happened and what it means for you, and what consequences are coming as a result of that. And then you decide where you're going next, and after you decide where you go next, that's what leads you into your next scene. And before I had just not taken that seriously at all when I had been writing in class before. And when she finally said, "Hey, I really think you need to look at this, and you really need to start showing a little bit more of how your characters are reacting to all these things that are going on. It's going to make them seem a lot more real and a lot more human, and it's going to be a lot more easy for the readers to get behind it." And that was basically what really unlocked it. That's what really made the Dresden Files really roll along for the first book that I wrote. Because I'd written several short stories that were basically in that world with a different character, and the scenes were really great, but they just didn't grab anybody. I mean, they would say, "Yeah, I read it, and it read easily and smoothly and so on." But when I got to the end, I didn't really feel like there was any kind of emotional punch to it. And the reason there wasn't was because I wasn't giving them anything to work with. That was on me. So I went back in like, okay, let me figure out how to add emotional punch. And it turns out the way you do that is by making your characters, react like human beings, and to show people this is why I'm reacting to this. This is what matters to my character. This is what hurts. Especially this is what hurts. That's something that we can all identify with because we all feel pain.
Yeah. The legend of the Dresden Files goes that she then said, "Oh, this is great. What's next?" And you came back with a 20 book outline.
Yeah.
That you're still following to a degree.
Yeah, I think it's going to be more like 22 books.
Okay.
I've written a story, an epic story, 20 books long before. So my plan right now is I think it's going to be about 22 of the case books like we've had so far, and then just a big old double-sized book, trilogy to kind of capstone off the whole thing.
Nice.
And the trilogy is going to be titled Stars and Stones, Hell's Bells, and Empty Night. There's a reason for all those phrases or curses inside the Dresden Files world. And
yes.
to bring that out later.
Nice. Well, being that you've been writing a series for 2 decades, going off of this massive plan that you architected, all those years ago, when you start a new series like Cinder Spires, do you approach it in the same way where you have this grand architected plan and you're following, or are you able to hold a plan for a series like that more loosely, give yourself a chance to stretch creatively in different ways, or are you a strict plan writer?
Cinder Spires, I wrote with breakpoints in it. So if it was going well, then I've got a plan to finish it off after a trilogy. And if it's not going well, it'll be 3 books long, and we can have a fulfilling trilogy out of that. If it's going better than that, then I've got a plan for 6 books, and I've also got a plan for 9 books, just in case. And so I'll be able to tell in the next book or so, which way I'm going to go with it. But right now it's looking like 6, but if enough people get behind it, I'm up for 9.
Nice. You've now published 17 Dresden Files books, 6 Codex Alera books, a number of shorter pieces that fill in gaps along the way, 2 Cinder Spires books, or the second Cinder Spires book comes out this fall. How do you maintain a balance between your author life and your real life? You alluded earlier that you'd kind of had a down spot for a couple of years, and people keep asking. I think this was right before Peace Talks came out. Jim, where's Peace Talks? When's it coming out? You promised.
Yeah.
That, and the more people say stuff like that, I would imagine that it just, becomes, and a number of other authors can attest to, people really love this thing and they want more of it. And you're just one person, and it all has to come out of your brain and through your fingers. And, that a person can only do what a person can do. How do you maintain a healthy work-life balance so that you can continue to tell stories that people love without sacrificing your soul to do it?
Well, first of all, let me say that no writer writes as fast as he wants to. He writes as fast as he can.
Yeah.
And if you just don't have the book, I mean, for me, I would rather wait until I had something that I thought was worthy to be read, than just sort of dash a book out and say, there you go, everybody. Here's a book. It's to the Jim Butcher formula. Enjoy. Anybody can do that. When I personally, I went through some personal things that were pretty rough, and I was learning how to deal with those. And it took a while. Not all life is easy, and sometimes it comes up and hits you in the face. And which is actually what the new Dresden book is about in a lot of ways. It's about, Dresden's had this huge epic battle. A bunch of Chicago got wiped out. There's all kinds of problems that are going to come about as a result of that. And the book is much about how do you get back up after you've been knocked down. And there's all these other things happening too. There's like a new Valkyrie bodyguard. He gets a new apprentice. You've got this whole issue with Lara happening. But the book it's more about how do you recover when life comes up and really, really delivers something bad to you. And that's something that I think it's going to resonate with a lot of people, especially after the past 2 or 3 years. And as far as maintaining balance goes, oh my gosh, how do you balance your life? How do you keep things balanced? How do any of us do it? And I think the key is moderation and taking good care of ourselves. Make sure we get enough sleep, eat healthy food. I mean, it's all this stuff that you got told when you were a kid that a lot of us ignored for a long time. But you have to spend some time and focus, just saying, okay, I got to take care of myself today. It's like, I got to get out and get some exercise done. I got to stretch out a little bit and, make sure that I'm not going to have issues with my back today. I got to make sure I eat some good food and not eat a whole bunch of cookies, because that'll make my brain too slow and logy to get good writing done. And, just kind of do whatever you can to experience new things. I think that's one of the key things for me. I've taken up whitewater rafting lately, and I love whitewater rafting. It is so much fun. Nice. I actually went to a 37-degree river without a suit on this spring. I had to swim out of it. And that was really cool. I was able to get out and everything and take care of myself in what could have been a dangerous situation. And I got done with that. And I was like, yeah, okay, I'm feeling pretty good. I better go ride. That sort of thing. But
it's 110 degrees in South Mississippi today, so 37-degree water sounds pretty amazing right now.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It was I was about to say it was cool, but I will say the experience was exhilarating. Actually it come out. I mean, I got out of the river just about the same time my legs stopped working. I had to kind of look down at my feet because I couldn't feel them, to be able to tell where they were going down on the rocks at the side of the river. But I kind of got out of that and I was like, yes, I survived. Awesome. That was cool.
Are there things that you read, watch, listen to that fill the creative well, that put back into you when you've poured out so much? Are there places you go to kind of, either for your mental health or just out of pure enjoyment, because you write stories that bring joy to so many people? There have to be things that you like to do just for you that don't necessarily have to come out in Dresden Files or Cinder Spires, that just Jim loves to do.
Yeah, I get online and murder fools in competitive video games. I like playing a lot of shooters. I like playing League of Legends. League of Legends is just like the most savage Darwinian, evolutionary place you can possibly be on the internet. You make a mistake, you hear about it from everyone. And I love getting on there and playing. I'm on there as Jim Butcher author, so I'm friends with like a lot of readers, and then we'll jump on together, and we'll chat and throw smack talk at each other and stuff while we go play, and I have a good time with that.
Love it.
I like working out a lot. I go to the gym. I'll put on podcasts or whatever, and sort of see what's going on in the creative world. Listening to a couple different podcasts there while I'm lifting. I've been doing a lot more endurance training lately. Kind of learning a bit more about that. And I go on walks with my dog. I hang out with my girl. That kind of thing.
Love it. I did notice a few months ago in in an email from a publisher that your son has a new series out. What is that like to see your progeny, taking up the family business?
Oh, I busted out all the buttons on my shirts. I was so happy. Yeah, my son and I, it was several years ago, I'd offered to teach him to write when he was going off to college, and he was like, Dad, I think I'll let the professionals handle that. So
Right.
he went off and studied at KU, has a pretty good sci-fi program. He went and studied there for a while. And then he came up to me a few years after that and was like, I think if they could do what you do, they'd be doing that, because they seem to be really miserable teaching. And and I said, oh, yeah? He said, yeah. He said, do you think you can teach me? I said, sure. And so we started working on stuff. And we still get together twice a week, and we'll watch the latest Star Wars series, the latest Marvel thing on Disney. And we'll watch it and we'll critique it and say, well, how could they have made it better? Well, they could have done this, and we talk about story and characters and so on, the whole time. And we still do that a couple days a week. But he got his first book done, and I think his first book was about as good as my third one, and his second book was about as good as my sixth one. And he's going to leave me eating his dust before too much longer. But he has he's been studying from me and Brandon Sanderson, which I think I had to learn from somebody. I guess Sanderson's okay, that guy. I've been very pleased that he's gone out and taken the stuff that I taught him, and then gone out and started collecting things from other successful professionals, and started to put together his own style. And I think he's gonna. I've read some of his other stuff. Right now, he's got some urban fantasy going, and then he's written some kind of post-apocalyptic stuff that I think is incredible. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what he does with his career. But he's going to leave the old man eating dust. I mean, he does have the advantage of having been, trained by somebody who was, a New York Times best-selling writer, I guess. Which was not the same. It's not the same as my experience. But at the same time, he slaved a long time from the time he got his first novel done to the time he got published. I mean, I think it took him about 9 years to break in.
Wow.
So he's paid his dues. I think he's a solid professional. I think he's going to make a lot of people happy. That just pleases me to no end.
I bet. I can't wait to see what's going to come of his career and what is to come with the Cinder Spires and Dresden Files and the epic fantasy series that we know is coming.
Yeah, epic fantasy epic.
The Olympian Affair, Cinder Spires Book 2 is going to be out this fall, but it's up for pre-order now. You can go to Amazon and reserve your copy now. Jim, if people have been living under a rock and have not been following along with what's going on with Dresden Files and Cinder Spires and Codex Alera and all that great stuff, is there a place online that is a central repository of all things Jim Butcher where people can get up to speed on everything going on?
Yeah, you can go to jimbutcheronline.com. That's my website. You'll be able to find stuff there. We have Jim Butcher News on Facebook. You can look for me on Twitter. I'm at Longshot Author on Twitter, and I'll announce new stuff coming out and stuff like that there. And occasionally I put up pictures of my dog and stuff like that. My social media strategy is, my son told me his social media strategy. I think it's brilliant. He says, I'm going to get on social media and all I'm going to do is say thank you, and here's pictures of my dog. And I'm like, this is the most brilliant strategy. That is the best. I think I'm going to emulate him. I think I'm going to take a lead from him. He's sharp.
That sounds great. Well, Jim, we're going to link up all of those places where people can find you and where they can pre-order the Olympian Affair in the show notes of this episode. Thank you, as always, for taking time to come on and share with us today.
Hank, it was good to talk to you again. I'll see you later.